Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Shawn. I've been
likewise. Appreciate it. Where are you located? What part of the world are you in?
I'm located in Dubai. I'm originally from Iraq. I've moved to Dubai in 2005.
Okay. I've been there once. Nice place. Hot. It's hot though, as you know.
It's hot, yeah. Now with the cloud seeding, today's like Dubai is wet. So we're enjoying some winter kind of fabricated style. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. I've heard you came to Dubai a few times.
Well, I've just been once. I was there April of 2021, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
No, 2022.
Was it for
it was just for a vacation. It was just some friends.
Just for a vacation.
Yeah, we usually have. There's another couple that we usually vacation with every year. We were supposed to go to Egypt this recent year, but decided due to all the sort of activity, around there, was not a good time to go to Egypt. So I think we're going to go to. I guess we're going to go to the Galapagos Islands this year instead. So.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, let's start. I'm a really big fan of your work and whatever you say. And I came to know about you just, I would say, last year. Unfortunately, I didn't know about the carnivore diet that much. I've heard about it, but not much as I know of today. And thanks to Jessie, shout out to Jessie. I did a podcast with her. I saw some reels. Jessie's an American lady who's living with her husband in Japan. She posts a lot. Yeah. She's following you, and you followed her as well.
I did. I interviewed her a while back. Yeah, I remember. She's been on.
So she talked a lot.
2 years now or something. Yeah.
Yeah, she talked a lot about your work, and I heard your name from her. So I started digging into who's Dr. Shwan Baker, and ever since, you have changed my mind. And I was very close to become a carnivore person until I was forced to be so by a Discovery Channel, who came to me and told me, like, we want to do a documentary about a diet in the Middle East. We know you, so are you ready to be delegated? Are you ready to be advocating the carnivore diet? I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. It's always been on my mind, so let's go for it. This is the time. So this is my journey now, almost 6 months ago, starting from 1st of September. So I'm 5.5 months into carnivore.
Okay.
And whatever you said, I must admit, it is 100% true. Every single point you mentioned in all your podcasts, videos, book even, which, where is it? It's right here in front of me. It changed my life in a good way.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Good. That's good to hear. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I get that literally almost every day. I just had a guy from the NFL, retired NFL player, just tell me the same thing. It's just, I'm not here making stuff up. I mean, I'm only the reason I'm saying this is because this is what I've seen, and I've seen it consistently. So good for you for trying it. I mean, it's a lot of people that are too skeptical to try it, but I mean, there's the skeptics and there's people that have done it, and I think that there's a big difference between the two.
Totally true. Especially in this region, the Middle East, we're still way behind with knowledge and updated knowledge. We still follow and worship medicine given by doctors. So whatever the doctor says, and I will tell you my experience during the Discovery Channel episodes that we recorded in 2 days. So I was 44 days into carnivore already. So they decided to make something like a twist in the program to go and do a blood test. And I was expecting my high cholesterol, high LDL levels to be like way high. So when I did it and I showed it to the doctor, where they took me to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist here in Dubai, I don't want to mention the name of the hospital, but he sat me down. He was like, listen, and cameras were rolling, like we were recording the whole scene of me visiting the doctor and the doctor giving me advice about the diet. He's like, when I was younger at your age, I used to have high cholesterol. I started statins. I lowered my cholesterol. I'm still using statins up to date. And I can tell you there's nothing to be worried about it. So why don't you quit or continue, but use statins? And he gave me like a long lecture, and I was just listening. And I was like, aren't there a debate about high cholesterol being good? He's like, yeah, but your numbers are really high. My numbers, by the way, were, in the first test that I did after 44 days, the total cholesterol was 385 and the LDL was 314. So it shocked him because it was way beyond the normal range. So after he stopped talking, I told him, doctor, I'm almost your age. There's only 2 years difference, so I'm not way much younger than you. So this kind of like stopped him. He's like, and I started asking him questions. Do you drink alcohol? Do you smoke? And all his replies were yes, yes. And do you stay up late? Do you work out? Do you eat sweets? So I started telling him that I don't eat sweets for the last 13 years. I'm a person who sleeps very early, wake up early. I'd never had alcohol in my life. I don't smoke at all. I'm pretty much healthy. I go to the gym. I'm a coach and I eat clean food. So the only indicators in my results, which were high cholesterol and high LDL. So how can you put me on statins, and how do you consider yourself better than me in terms of the readings, living your lifestyle and comparing yourself to my lifestyle? So what are your thoughts about cholesterol? Let's take it from here.
Yeah, well, it's a nuanced topic. I'm not somebody that just dismisses it outright and says it doesn't matter, because I think it's part of the causal pathway for disease. I mean, I think there's a decent amount of evidence for that. However, I think it's a dependent variable. I think it's a problem in certain situations. As you described, his situation, it would probably be clearly problematic. In your situation, I would say we don't know if it's a problem. I think because the appropriate studies have not been finished yet. They are in process right now. So we'll have a greater understanding of that. Now, my inclination is that probably you're fine. And the way to sort of clarify that would be like some sort of imaging study, whether it's a CAC score, coronary artery calcium scan, depending on how old you are, or there's other tests you can do.
I'm 44 almost.
Yeah, so you're I mean, over 40, you're in the range where that test would be helpful. Presumably it would be zero. I don't know. It may or may not be. But then again, there's a really nice study out of Denmark that this was published 2022, I believe, maybe 2023. And they looked at people with zero CAC scores, and they found that progression to cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, revascularization, sudden death, had no relationship whatsoever to LDL cholesterol. It was completely unrelated. So what that means is if you have the propensity to develop heart disease, you have all these factors in place, then the cholesterol becomes problematic. If you don't have the propensity to have heart disease, then the LDL doesn't seem to be the issue, at least in that study. What did was smoking and diabetes. And as you mentioned, sugary foods that raise your blood glucose and often predispose you to diabetes risk, being obese, however you get there, too much fat, too much sugar, whatever. Those things are going to be probably more problematic in this situation. Now, again, the data that we can definitively say is forthcoming. So like there's a huge study that Matt Budoff at UCLA is doing, which they're just finishing the data collection period right now. That data will probably become available probably towards the end of spring, maybe early summer, and then we'll have some more insight into that. But I mean, at least from what I've seen, and again, albeit anecdotally, but again, into the numbers of many thousands now, is people that are otherwise metabolically healthy. In other words, not diabetic, not hypertensive, not overweight, not suffering from chronic inflammation, that have very high LDL cholesterol, even to the numbers you have or even higher, very often do not show any evidence of heart disease. And so this is I think this is a population which we don't have a lot of data on. Most of the data that we have concerning heart disease is on sick people. We don't routinely study extremely healthy people with regard to heart disease because there's no need to, because most of them don't have heart disease, right? So again, so I can't say with 100% certain. There are other people in the sort of low carb space who will say cholesterol doesn't matter. It's a non-factor. I haven't seen enough data to convince me that, and I know all the arguments. I mean, you can look at the all-cause mortality tables, and you can see that higher LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol is associated with greater longevity in a lot of cases. You've seen all the alternative theories for heart disease, whether it's a clotting issue, whether it's more related to triglyceride HDL ratios or insulin levels. And I think all those are true there. But, again, to say that cholesterol has no role in the pathogenesis of cardiovascular disease, I think would be incorrect based on what I know. However, again, I'll say it again, I think it is a dependent variable. And again, if you don't have those other factors in place, it may not be significant.
Yeah, that's exactly what also my father said. My father's a surgeon, and he mentioned the same thing about cholesterol and looking into other factors as well. Doctor, the first question that I get is, which is very well known in this region and probably worldwide, and you hear it a lot, is the gout. So, like, you're eating too much protein, and what about the kidney and the gout? So, what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, there's two different questions. I'll take the gout question first, and we'll talk about protein in the kidney. So, gout is, obviously associated with high levels of uric acid, which then crystallize and they end up in different spots in the joint. If it's in the joint, then we call that classic gout, and it's painful and it's not fun to have. Or can deposit in the skin. You have these thing called gouty tophi. Gout is more than just elevated uric acid, and what elevates uric acid? Well, a couple things do. Alcohol does, fructose does, purines, which are, when we have DNA, there's little base pairs, purines and pyrimidines, and those things are higher in, foods that have a lot of cellular nuclear material like DNA. So plants have DNA, so do animals, but animals may have a slightly more. So you have a little bit slightly higher purine load, but it's really a combination of immunologic factors, metabolic factors, and a few other things that are going on. So again, I think the uric acid, again, is a dependent variable, and you can have high uric acid and not have gout. You can have relatively low uric acid and still have gout. Almost without exception, every patient I ever took care of as a surgeon, because sometimes we would deal with gout as orthopedic surgeons, almost all of them were metabolically damaged in some way. They were diabetic, pre-diabetic, metabolic syndrome, hypertensive. So again, this is an issue for, it's an overall picture. And eating red meat, in fact, I see people with gout. And because when they go on a carnivore diet, which is heavy in particularly red meat, what happens is they get metabolically healthier and their gout goes away. They maybe early on, if they're really, really sick and they have a lot of metabolic issues, maybe they might have a flare up early on, but generally chronically 3 months, 6 months in, the gout goes away, and most of them never have a gout flare. So I don't think it's a real concern. I mean, gout was considered the disease of the rich in years past because, we think about it, only the very wealthy, the aristocracy had access to, they would say meat, but it was also sugars and things like that because, sugars entered the diet around the 17th century is when we started seeing a lot of actual refined sugar entering the diet. And this is when we started seeing gout, running through the wealthy classes. And so today, sugar is the food of the poor, really. I mean, sugar's in everything. It's in all the processed junk food. So really it's a metabolic disease. Now with regard to renal function and kidney disease, protein does not damage our kidneys. That is a complete sort of unfortunate sort of fallacy that we've even within the medical community don't really understand. This is based on something called the Brenner hypothesis. There was a guy named Dr. Brenner from the 80s, and he did some research on rats, and he found that if you fed a rat high protein diet, they would develop kidney failure. But that has not been shown in humans. Now we have associative data. That is to say that there are people that develop kidney disease, and you look at their diet overall, and it's a poor quality diet. It may be higher in protein, but it's not causative. And in fact, there was a really nice paper Stuart Phillips published in 2018. It was a systematic review of all the data on protein protein quantity in the diet and development of chronic kidney disease. And what he found was there's no difference: high protein, low protein. The unfortunate thing is when your kidneys are failing, they start leaking protein. But it's not the protein that's causing the damage. It's just a symptom. It's like saying, you have a temperature when you have an illness. It's not the temperature that's causing the illness. It's the, whatever the pathogen.
It's a syndrome of,
Right. So it's a symptom, not a cause. And so that's the other thing. And the other thing is that there's a friend of mine, Dr. David Unwin, who practices in the UK, and he's published a really nice case series on diabetics with kidney disease going on higher protein diets, low carb, higher protein diets. And guess what happens to their kidney disease? It reverses. It goes away. So it's reversal. So I think what's causing kidney disease is really just the same thing that's causing the overall illness in society. It's the reliance on refined carbohydrates, cheap processed foods, which I know in all parts of the Middle East is becoming really, really prominent. And you're seeing a lot of diabetes and a lot of obesity is taking over. And it's really unfortunate to see that.
One of the things that Dr. Robert Lustig, I was listening to his podcast many years before, he mentioned that one of the reasons why the Middle East is high in diabetic people is because it's a country where most of them are Muslims. They don't drink alcohol, so they kind of go towards the sugary food to get this satisfaction. And there's no limits, because when you're drinking alcohol, you reach to a point where you're drunk or you stop, certainly. And most of the people, they don't drink unless there's an occasion, unless you're an alcoholic. But eating sweets and desserts here is like a common thing in every meal, and they feed it to kids. It's all everywhere, and I think it's the same in any other country. Yeah. Doctor, let's dive into the main things which I'm facing as a personal trainer in the gym, and also since I've been doing this carnivore diet, many people come and ask me these questions, like what about the importance of fiber in the diet? And that means that you're not going to go to the bathroom as usual. From what I experienced, I am very much okay with going to the bathroom. Quantity is less, which means that I think, from my side, correct me if I'm wrong, but the body's absorbing the majority of what I'm eating and releasing less. I haven't had, I used to think that I'm healthy. I was always on a low carb diet for a very long time. And when I started cutting it entirely, especially the vegetables, I realized that I was bloated. And this bloatedness was the first thing that I noticed that disappeared. And my stomach went way inside than it was before. So let's talk about fibers.
Yeah. Well, I think fiber is one of these things that's conditionally beneficial. And I think it is something that, given the average diet, which is for most people not very good, it's low quality. It's kind of mostly junk food, particularly in the U.S. And I imagine, where you are, it's catching up. I mean, in the United States, we eat something like 70% of our calories coming from ultra processed food. So fiber tends to be, fruits, vegetables, whole grain, tends to be a marker of diet quality overall. So it's like, if I'm eating a lot of fiber, I'm eating less desserts and junk food and ice creams and cookies and cakes and things like that. So in that case, you'll see a relationship. Those people eat more fiber are, doing better than the general population, which is not a high bar, quite honestly. We talk about, one of the major things that's often talked about fiber is its impact on the so-called microbiome, which, kind of resides in our lower intestines, our colon primarily. And, what is said is, fiber, while we can't digest it, and interesting, I just interviewed a guy who had an ileostomy. He lost his colon due to ulcerative colitis and now lives with an ileostomy. And he basically tells me that any fruits or vegetables he consumes, there's zero digestion. It is completely, however it's chewed up, whatever it looks like when he swallows it is exactly how it comes out. Doesn't get digested. So it completely, fully intact is produced entered into our colons. And then we have the microbiome that interacts on that to produce short chain fatty acids, which are said to protect the lining of the colon. Now, he doesn't have a colon. It's gone. So he doesn't have that microbiome, and he's fine. He's completely healthy. So first of all, that's not necessary. Now, I've seen there are a lot of people that have had colectomies. And so, if you cut a human's colon out, they can live a full, normal, healthy life. Albeit they have to go, they use a bag to go to the bathroom, but they don't die early in most cases. Whereas if you cut out another animal's colon, like another primate, say like a chimpanzee or gorilla, they'll die. They just cannot, because they need that. That's a major part of their caloric intake. But the reality is that, you know, the short chain fatty acids, the butyric acid that's created from that, can be produced from protein. It can be produced through beta hydroxybutyrate, which, you know, when we're on a low carb diet, we tend to circulate more of that. And obviously, it is not essential, or you would have already died by now, because you haven't had any. I haven't had any significant fiber in about 8 years, and I'm still alive and doing well, and there's no issues. And you absolutely can use the bathroom. In fact, I did a study on 100 people that went carnivore. We did this in 2017 for 90 days. Average bowel frequency was about just a little more than once a day. That was we ended up with 1.2 per day. So
absolutely,
I
confirm
you
that.
are absolutely right with the fact that, yes, you'll have reduced waste product, because again, we are absorbing all of that food. It's just what you eat, you actually absorb and utilize. When you're consuming a fiber-rich diet, you're kind of wasting money, because half it's ending up in the toilet. It's like, well, you're paying, you're flushing that food dollar down the toilet.
True.
So it's interesting that it's a carnivorous diet is more efficient, and if we look at all the sort of animals that have ever lived on planet Earth throughout history, whether they're swimming, flying, crawling on the ground, about 80% of them are carnivorous. And it's because it's a more efficient way to obtain the nutrition that you need as an animal. And that's why I think it's a very efficient diet. As you probably notice, you don't need to eat as much volume. You tend to stay full longer. You tend to absorb, utilize everything. Yeah, for sure. So fiber is unnecessary in my view.
Yeah. I've always been on fasting. I mean, I am a Muslim from background in religion, and I've been fasting for many years. For me, intermittent fasting was kind of like easy to do, more convenient with the low carb diet, and I've been doing it. I've been moving breakfast for quite a while, but since the past 5.5 months on a carnivore, I realized that it is much like they go together, and it's much convenient and easier, because the meal that I have is more fat dense, protein dense. It pushes me and keeps me satiated for a very long time. So I reduced my meals intake into, I would say, 2 to 3 maximum a day, but in a very small window. And it was very much efficient. So I think they work perfectly well together.
Yeah, you're not incorrect with it. And obviously, with the Muslim faiths comes Ramadan, where you have to, fast from, from basically sun up to sundown. And, it's interesting. Now there's actually people that are actually gaining weight during Ramadan because they feast on all this garbage, immediately when they can break their fast. And it shouldn't be a time where you gain weight. Yeah.
Yeah, funny fact is because how they practice the religion and how they practice this kind of the eating habits is like they literally eat until the sunrise, and then they sleep, and they, like, during the fasting time they're sleeping and they wake up just before they break their fast. So since we opened the subject of Ramadan, this was my next question. Ramadan is like a month away from now, and I'm definitely going to be fasting. I'm just, what are your thoughts? Like, since it's a dry fast, and for me, I work early morning, so I wake up, probably I might have my my breakfast, like the meal before the sunrise, before it's time. So I do have enough time, because that's the time I wake up for. So I'll have my meal, and then I'll continue fasting until the sunset. So is there any kind of recommendations from a medical or an experienced carnivore person into what I should be taking into consideration? What should I be avoiding? Should I introduce dates? Because we break our fast with dates. So are dates okay to be introduced? Are they not? And should I continue? I'm thinking like to discuss this with you, because I need your opinion. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, it's what, so it's going to be what, in March or April? I guess April, March.
Yeah, exactly 1 month. Exactly 1 month in March.
So, I mean, you're going to have about I think, 11 hours or so, or 12 hours of maybe 12 hours of fasting time.
Could
Not
be
too long.
12, 13. Yeah, not
It's
more.
not like it's in
Yeah.
July when you have the longest. That's probably the hardest for all of us.
No. It's I think we're lucky.
Yeah, so I think it's not that challenging to go 12 hours on carnivore without a meal. I mean, it's quite easy, I think, for many cases. You know, that's what I do overnight all the time, because I just do it in reverse. I might eat a meal at 5 p.m. and not eat my next meal until 11 a.m., which is, that's 18 hours pretty easily. So I don't think it'll be challenging. As long as you eat a sufficiently sized breakfast, and maybe some lamb, beef, and eggs or something like that, whatever you prefer. Eat a decent sized meal. I don't know that the dry fast really makes much difference, quite honestly. I will say that low carb diets and higher protein diets do tend to be more dehydrating. So you might want to make sure you just, hit some fluid with, right after your meal. So you have some fluid there. And then whether you want to break it or date, if the tradition is to break it with dates, I mean, that's probably fine. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you need to do
It's
that.
not necessary. No, it's not. It's just a cultural thing. I don't think it's
And I think that, I think probably because what you're seeing is a lot of people that are not fat adapted will choose dates because it's a rapid source to restore your glucose. And I think that's why, and you're not going to be suffering from that, because you're going to be, basically have a more even energy supply, because you're mostly focusing on fats and proteins. And so I think it's more for those people that are, they start cratering without their glucose, and then they have to boost it back up very quickly. So I think that's probably the traditional reason for doing it. But I don't think your physiology will be required at all. So that's up to you. I'm not somebody that's out here to demonize all carbohydrates, by the way. But I'm just saying, I don't see where it would be necessary in my view.
Yeah. Since we're talking about carbohydrates and moving on with the ketones and fat energy, and you also are an athlete, and I see you deadlift, and I see you do all your workouts, which I really enjoy because I do it myself as well. And this was my first concern going on a carnivore diet, that I will lose my energy. And I started struggling the first 2 days. I don't know if it's psychologically or if it's really something related. I used to have like this brain fogs. It just took me 2 days until I felt like I'm more adaptive. And this is where I started realizing the energy levels are supreme. I wake up in the morning and it's flat until I sleep. So I'm speaking to you right now. My energy is the same as when it was since I woke up at 4 a.m. this morning, and we are in PM right now. So it's exact AM, PM opposite timings between you and us. So the weights that I lift, the gain or the pump during the workout that I get, which is a main concern for people who are in the industry of bodybuilding or fitness, question in the absence of carbs. So how can we address that to them from your point of view? And what I have seen and what I have noticed is that energy levels and strength-wise, what I deadlift is the same, what I squat is the same, what I lift in terms of other workouts is the same, and the pump and the muscle texture is totally different. I have shredded fat, although I was kind of lean, but I have dropped a massive amount of fat. My muscle fiber started showing very much nicely. The skin texture is totally nice. I felt the pump is different. People stare at me when I'm working out and if I'm wearing any tank tops. So this is my points that I noticed, but I just want to know the science behind the absence of carbs and how our glycogen muscles restore glycogen. How do you, if it's empty and there's no carbs, does it really refill from the gluconeogenesis, turning protein and fat into glucose and then into glycogen into the muscle? Or is there any other thing that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple things. I think the short answer is yes, you can restore your glycogen via adequate protein and fat through gluconeogenesis. And that's probably sufficient for most people doing most types of training, including weightlifting and strength training. I think if you were maybe running a marathon at a world-class pace, that would be challenging. If you're doing CrossFit and you're doing multiple workouts in a day, it would be challenging. But with an overnight, bolus of protein, you're going to be close to topping off all your glycogen. And in fact, we're starting to find out that it's maybe not muscle glycogen which is driving some of the performance. It may be just blood glucose, which is a sort of a different issue, and that's kind of in part regulated by liver glycogen and some of the kind of regulatory hormones. We know that, for instance, a lot of people that are, when we talk about building muscle, clearly the biggest influence is training. That is the number one stimulus. You've got to train, to the appropriate intensity, volume, consistency, so on and so forth. You're not going to build muscles without training. So that's the number one. Number two is adequate protein, right? And we know that, and again, Stu Phillips wrote another wonderful paper on this. Protein, muscle protein synthesis is dependent upon adequate protein, carbohydrates, via the action of insulin. And carbohydrates don't really, even though they stimulate more insulin, it doesn't lead to any more muscle protein synthesis. So as long as you have adequate protein, you don't need the carbohydrates. What you do need the carbohydrates for, what you can use the carbohydrates for, is a source of fuel. And if you are chronically adapted to using carbohydrates, then your performance is going to be better with carbohydrates. That's clear. And so a lot of people, when they drop the carbs and they're used to it, like you've been low carb for years, so it probably wasn't affecting you. But if you took a high carb athlete and made them low carb, yeah, they're going to see a tank in their performance for sure. And it may take them 3, 4, 5, 6 months to finally adapt to this. But once you're fully adapted to it, all but there's very little that you cannot do, based on, fueling yourself with a little bit higher fat. Your glucose is never zero. So glucose is always available at those higher levels, but you're probably going to be using higher and higher amounts of fat at higher and higher intensities. Now, the other thing that, and Phil Prims has done some nice work on that around ketogenic athletes, and actually sometimes seeing performance improvement over their carbohydrate-based peers, depending on how long they've been adapted. So adaptation process is key here. The other thing you mentioned about pump. When we think about a pump, it's not glycogen per se, it's fluid. I mean, this, you think about this, fluid, blood flow. That's why you get, when you do a drop set of biceps, your arms get bigger and bigger. It's because fluid is
80% of the blood.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you get the same level of pump? Well, I find that, basically just hydrating myself with electrolytes and water prior to the workout. So I'm well hydrated. And so I have that increased blood volume. I have that increased intracellular water. And then the pumps are fine. So it's not like, because people say we're going to be flat without carbs. You're going to be flat without fluids. And what carbs do, is allow you to retain more fluid, either through sodium retention or, its association with glycogen. But you can mimic that with just taking plenty of fluid and salt before you train. And you'll get probably just because I think it is important for your muscles to be hydrated to work effectively. When they're hydrated, they function better. You're going to be stronger. They're going to be more efficient, so there is a difference there. So if you don't take care to make sure you're hydrated, then you maybe compromise your workout. But as far as, long-term with training, as you mentioned, your energy is pretty flat. So you've got stable energy so you can train. You're not dependent on, hyping up, a lot of people taking these pre-workouts and caffeine and sugar and trying to get going. And you may not need that. And the other thing is, what I find as an older athlete, because I'm, getting close to 60 now, I find that because I'm not sore, I don't get as sore, and my recovery is better. So I'm able to train consistently day in and day out at a very high level. And that over time results in, I think a pretty decent result. So that's kind of an overview of what's going on there.
I think, but it's fine. Yeah, it's okay now. Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, the part where you said like those athletes who are dependent on high levels of glucose or carbs tend to have difficulties thinking even about lowering their carbohydrate as a source of energy. I have two clients, and one of them is my friend. Actually, he's a colleague. One of my clients, he's a half marathon runner. So when I adopted the Carnivore Diet, he was curious to try, and he was asking me so many questions, which I managed to reply safely. And then he was having half a marathon, but 2 months into the marathon and the way that we were training and the way that he was running outside, he adapted the Carnivore Diet. So there are a few points that he mentioned when he was running the half marathon, is that the energy started with 100, and it continued throughout the whole marathon, lowering in a very gradual way until the end. He reached like probably 60% based on his he's a numeric person, so he chases numbers. So he mentioned 60% at the end of the half a marathon, and he mentioned that in the past when he was on a glucose, this wasn't the case, because you see like there was a drop at the beginning and the start after 20 minutes, and then it comes up and picks up again, and then goes back down, and so on and so forth. But this stability that he had running the marathon, on being on keto, carnivore, keto as energy, this was his case. So have you faced anyone who is a long distance runner who was
Yeah. I've talked to a number of ultramarathon runners that have done this. I mean, running 100 plus miles. There's one guy in particular, I forget his name now, he's from Brazil, and he's run very fast 100 miles completely on carnivore. So, I mean, it can be done. But again, I think realizing this is a very slow adaptation process. You're 6 months, maybe even a year to fully sort of be able to capitalize on the physiology. But you're all right. The energy play is more steady. And, a lot of guys, obviously they're taking gels and they're consuming, 60, 80 grams an hour of, carbohydrates for their fueling needs. And a lot of times, particularly in the longer races, they end up with a lot of stomach issues. And I'm not, it's interesting because we're starting to see data that show that some of these, endurance athletes are actually developing heart disease at a higher rate than we would expect. And it may be because they're always constantly consuming sugar to sort of support their activities. That may be the case. Can't say for sure, but that's a concern.
True. Yeah. The other case was a type 1 diabetic athlete who happened to get his, he was diagnosed with type 1 at a later age, I think at 25. So he's been living with it for the last 8 or 9 years now. He's in his mid-30s. But he's a CrossFitter, and obviously he knows how to inject himself with insulin. He's got this EGM running all the time, so he measures this, measures that. So he was curious to lower the number of or the amount of insulin that he puts in his body by lowering the carbs that he's taking to the level that he wakes up and he literally does not eat any carbohydrates. So his meal is kind of a carnivore style, but added to it the avocado as a source of fat or extra source of fat, where he mentioned that within the 24 hours that he used to take probably up to 70 to 80 units of insulin, it dropped down into 4 or 5. Which was something really shocking for him to believe that this is possible. What can you comment about this, and if you have any other examples?
Oh yeah, plenty with type 1 diabetics. I mean, it is type 1 diabetes as opposed to type 2 diabetes. You've lost the capacity to produce any significant insulin, and so you're kind of dependent upon insulin. But yes, I mean, a carnivore diet is a way to dramatically lower your insulin requirements, so that instead I've seen people that were using 100 plus units a day go down to 10 or 15. So, I mean, you can dramatically bring that down. And I think that's important because not only, and the other thing you notice is the glycemic control is much better. If he's wearing a CGM, it'll probably be very flat. Whereas before you're always chasing and it's hard to accurately dose it, because if you're chasing carbohydrates, sometimes they rise very rapidly. If you don't time your insulin right, you're going to be very hypoglycemic. And so you're constantly dealing with this roller coaster, and it's very unsettling, because it doesn't feel good to have high glucose. It doesn't feel good to have low glucose. And so they're always kind of sort of fighting, feeling good. The other thing that's interesting, the paper that came out a couple of years ago that shows that with regard to type 1 diabetics, those that use greater amounts of insulin develop cancer at a higher rate, which is kind of curious. It's kind of interesting to say that if you're a type 1 diabetic and you need a lot of insulin, your cancer risk has gone up. And it may be because maybe the foods you're eating are problematic and you just need more insulin to do that. Or it might be the insulin yourself. The high doses of insulin are perhaps, problematic. So irrespective of whatever the cause is, it's good that he's using less insulin. I think, you want to have enough insulin so you can support muscle growth, of course, but you don't want to have so much that you're just fighting blood glucose all the time. I've got, not only do we see better blood glucose regulation, which is clearly happening, but we're also seeing the reversal of some of the pathology, because with diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, you worry about blindness because you have vascular disease in the eye, you have heart disease, kidney disease. All those things get better. I've seen people reversing their diabetic retinopathy, the blood vessels in their eye that are damaged go back to normal. Kidney function, as we mentioned earlier, gets better. So it's a great option for a type 1 diabetic.
Yeah. I have a few other cases as well. Like today, by coincidence, I was just writing down the questions at the gym and in the area where I sit down. And one guy approached me. He's Spanish. His mom had some surgeries done, and her and small intestines were overlapped and attached to each other. I think there's a medical term for it, but I'm not aware of.
Probably adhesions. Yeah.
Probably adhesions. Yeah. So she was forced by the doctor to eat regularly, like a normal diet. But her son, which is one of my friends or followers, actually, he mentioned to her to go on a carnivore diet. Following that, there's absence of fiber, which he believed that this was probably which is hurting her. And he said that she dropped around 6 kgs in just 1 month. She's feeling way much better. All the inflammation has gone away, and the issues with her joints as well. And she feels very much light in terms of the food that she's eating, and she doesn't have any issues. But this is something that drew my attention to the subject, that the doctors, they don't really care about what she should be eating, or what they were forcing her to eat vegetables and fruit and stay away from protein, thinking that the protein has the issues that she might be having trouble with what she has. So
yeah, well, I mean, I see a whole, I don't know what exactly she has, but I mean, we see a lot of people with either IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or more troubling is inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and we see a tremendous positive impact on diet in that. And again, as you mentioned, if your intestines are adhesed and they're sort of potentially having obstructions, and putting a bunch of fiber in there doesn't seem to make sense, because it's going to cause obstructions. And so, again, what we know from meat is it's broken down very nicely. I mean, that's why we have a acidic stomach. It's designed to break that down. It doesn't break down the fiber. It breaks down the meat. It becomes liquefied. You don't have these, boluses of indigestible stuff that's, pushing through your intestines. And so, but you're 100% right. Most physicians, even gastroenterologists, are kind of clueless on diet, because they've been recommending the healthy diet, the USDA, food pyramid or food guide or whatever you want to call it, healthy plate, has been not really helpful. And so they see that and they're like, well, diet doesn't matter, because if we recommend a healthy diet, they don't get better. If they eat the regular garbage, they don't get better. So diet doesn't matter in their mind. But if they're recommending a carnivore diet or something like that, then they would see that most of their patients are getting better, and they would have a different perspective. It's just that they don't know. I mean, there is we'll have a case series coming out of Harvard probably later this month or next month on inflammatory bowel disease. And so we'll start to get more information in the literature. And I'm currently behind the scenes working on getting some interventional trials done. Hopefully we'll have one on bowel disease in carnivore coming out hopefully in the next year or two. So, but it's clearly most physicians are in the dark when it comes to proper nutrition, when it comes to treating disease, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to touch base into something that I've noticed in my journey so far, is when I started with the carnivore diet, I knew that I was allowed to eat all sorts of protein, animal protein, and fat. So I started mixing between fish, chicken, dairy as well. as I went through the whole journey, midway, I started noticing that I lean towards more red meat, and I favor red meat rather than chicken. So I stopped completely for the past, I think, 2.5 months already, or probably 3, that I haven't tasted chicken. And what is there any reason why? Because I noticed that you prefer steak. I saw Michaela, I think, Peterson, also talking about the lion diet. So is there any reason behind that? Is there any justification from your experience?
Well, I mean, part of it is what it is, and that people generally tend to gravitate toward red ruminant meat, whether it's beef, lamb, or, something along those lines, wild game. And I think I think the reason for that, potentially, one, the nutrition is a little different. 2, there's a little more fat on red meat than like we've been trained to eat lean white meat, chicken and things like that, which fish, which tend, if you're not consuming carbohydrates, you got to get your energy from somewhere. So red meat has enough fat to do that in most cases. The other thing I think, and again, this is a little bit speculative, but if we go back to our ancient history when we were hunter gatherers, and you think about the technology that we know that we had early on was not sophisticated. We didn't have bow and arrow technology. We had kind of spears to hunt with for a long period of time.
Sure.
And you think about if you're trying to get a lot of nutrition from an animal and you're trying to chase birds with a spear, you're not going to get much food. Whereas if you kill a big, large animal, you've got millions of calories. And so I think that was what kind of shaped us, from an evolutionary perspective. So we were hunting these large megafaunal animals because they provided more calories, more nutrition, more fat. Whereas the birds, you wouldn't get much out of that, and I think even in, even like modern Africa, I mean, when I say modern, the last 100 years or so, hunting elephants was very common, and people could do that very easily. We know we could kill elephants. 1 or 2 guys could take down an elephant if they just timed it right. So it wasn't that challenging of a task. I mean, in the grand scheme of thing, you might spend 6 hours hunting an elephant, but then guess what? You get to eat for the next month or 2. Whereas if you're chasing birds around all day, you're doing, how much hunting do you have to do?
It's just a snack.
Yeah, and a very small snack at that. It's a lot of work for that. So I think that's probably why. Again, that's a little bit speculative, but you're definitely right. Most people that do carnivore will gravitate towards mostly red meat. That's just been my experience, and I think it's just inherently more satisfying. I mean, I think
is it because it's also nutrient dense, like full of minerals that we all know about? Yeah,
right. We have, there's differences between chicken and beef as far as nutrients are concerned, and I think we're just better aligned with red meat. And it's kind of funny because as a surgeon, I've operated on a lot of humans, and humans are red meat animals. We're made out of red meat. When you make an incision, it's all red meat in there. So I think we kind of, there's a funny saying, you are what you eat, but in some ways you eat what you are. I mean, for like, what am I trying to build here structure wise? Well, it's a lot of animal tissue, and it's a lot of things that are in red meat that make me up. So it makes sense to get them from other sources. It's not an advertisement for cannibalism, of course, but because some people think it that way. But I think, eating red meat animals is as close as we can get to sort of the most,
true
similar thing that we are.
I would like to ask about the supplements. I was a big fan of supplements and protein powder, and knowing the background of where protein powders are made of, it kind of sounds carnivore to me until I remember like the sweeteners that they add. Let's start with the protein powder and first, and then dive into if any person who's on a carnivore diet would require any sorts of supplements later.
All right. So just so you know, I've got about 5 minutes left before I have to go to another meeting.
Yeah. Okay. No problem.
Yeah. So as far as
let's wrap it up with this one then. Yeah.
As far as the protein powders are concerned, I mean, protein powders are a good source of protein, particularly whey protein. I mean, it's been known that it's one of the most bioavailable forms of protein you can get. So there's no doubt that protein powder is effective, and many bodybuilders, as you know, consume a lot of protein. I did for many years. However, I think that some of the downsides of protein powders are, sometimes they have these kind of unusual ingredients in there. You know, things like the different sweeteners, which some people may argue are problematic. I don't have a real clear stance on that, but I think that on a carnivore diet, protein should not be a concern. I mean, if you're eating mostly meat, you're going to get plenty of protein. I mean, even it's not very difficult to get, a gram per pound of body weight on a carnivore diet. It's very easy. And not only that, in addition to the protein, which is very bioavailable, the ratios of essential amino acids are very, nicely distributed, plenty of lysine, leucine, so on and so forth. But you're also getting so much more nutrition. You're getting all the cofactors, the carnitines, the carnosins, the creatines, the anserines, all those things that are shown to be helpful, plus fat. Fat actually has a role in things like muscle protein synthesis. We know that it impacts it in a way. And there's some studies that will suggest that cholesterol itself, which you only get from animal products, has a effect in muscle metabolism, positively. So I think that, I guess if you could not eat and you're in a bind, a protein powder could make sense to make sure you're hitting protein targets, but it's less preferable to me than just eating steak, eggs, something like that. Dairy products, if you tolerate that, those are probably better ways to get your nutrition in general. The other thing is, it's for you mentioned type 1 diabetics. Protein powders diabetics in general, because of the way they're absorbed very rapidly and by design, because they're powder, just like sugars and flours and other powdered foods, they get super rapidly absorbed, and it creates kind of an unnatural absorption pattern. We're not designed to eat powder. You can think about it.
True.
If you were to go out in the wild, there's no powder out there. You have to work really hard to make something powder, and so. Whole foods are a steak is not powder, and it's going to take you a long time to digest by design. And that's why you stay full. Whereas protein powder, you get this rapid onset of nutrition. Sometimes you'll see a concomitant, very high glucose spike, and that can be a problem for, say, a diabetic. But yeah, I'm not against protein powder per se, but I think there's better ways to get your protein. And I think whole foods are clearly the right answer.
True. All right. Thank you very much, Doctor. I know you're having another meeting, so thank you very much for your acceptance to this podcast. And if you ever come by to Dubai, please let me know. I would love to have you here in the studio or other studios that I have. Sure. And we'll dive into more about the carnivore and
or other topics as well. Yeah, I appreciate it, Saif, for having me on. And like I said, I don't know. I could be back in that area sometime, maybe in another year or so. So we'll see.
But, we might do something here in Dubai that I would love to have you as a speaker. So I might be inviting you here in person. So we'll talk about that later on as we go through.
Yeah. If I can make it happen, I'd be happy to go there. Okay. Thanks, Saif.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you.